So what happens when a community that has spent centuries saying no to injustice decides to build a really comprehensive yes? Well, today, we're going to dive into the story of one Quaker group that's doing just that. They've moved from just objecting to harmful systems to, well, diagnosing the root of the problem and proposing this deeply integrated plan for a whole new world. Let's get into their vision.
All right, so here's how we'll break it down. We'll start with their long history of taking these principled stands. Then we'll unpack their diagnosis of our current crises. From there, we'll explore the three big pillars of their solution: mutual aid, land back, and abolition. And finally, we'll see why they argue these three ideas have to work together as one single strategy.
You know, to really get what this community's trying to do now, you have to understand where they're coming from. Their story is totally rooted in this practice they call conscientious objection, which is basically a spiritual and moral refusal to go along with systems they believe are just plain wrong.
And this is nothing new for them. I mean, this tradition of objection goes way, way back to the 1650s, when their founder, George Fox, basically declared his opposition to all war. It kept going in the 1700s with the push to end slavery inside their own community, and right there in Iowa in the 1840s, they were a key part of the Underground Railroad. All of this really came to a head in the World Wars, where a lot of young Quakers chose to go to prison rather than fight. So the main point here is what they're doing now isn't coming out of the blue, it's just the latest chapter in a 350-year-old story.
So this long history of saying no has now led them to a really deep diagnosis of what, exactly, they feel they need to object to today. They've shifted from challenging single issues to seeing it all as one big, interconnected system.
Wow. This quote from one of their documents just lays it all out there, doesn't it? This isn't just some political analysis for them, it's a spiritual one. They're basically saying that the entire structure of our economy and society, what they call the colonial capitalist system and white supremacy, is completely at odds with their deepest beliefs. And that moral clarity? That's the engine driving this whole project.
And they get super specific with their diagnosis. They don't see these as, separate boxes to check off. Nope. They see them as a single, fused system of violence. First, you've got capitalist violence, this economic machine built on hierarchy and extraction. Second, there's colonial violence, the whole project of replacing indigenous people with a settler society. And third, what they call Christian state violence, the ideology that gave a moral green light for conquest and the state-sanctioned force used to keep that system in place.
Okay, so if that's the diagnosis, what's the cure? Well, their framework it's actually fascinatingly symmetrical. For each piece of the problem, they propose a direct antidote. First up is mutual aid, which is their answer to the logic of capitalism.
This comparison really puts it in black and white, where capitalism is all about transactions and the idea that there's not enough to go around. Mutual aid is built on collective care and solidarity. Where capitalism creates these ladders of who has and who doesn't, mutual aid is all about building relationships on a level playing field where everybody's needs actually matter. It's a total shift in how a community takes care of itself.
The key phrase to remember here is solidarity, not charity, right? Charity is often top-down. It's an us helping a them. But mutual aid is horizontal. It's about everyone working together to solve problems they all share, whether that's food or housing or bail funds. It's about building networks of trust that, in their view, make the hierarchies of the old system impossible to maintain. All right, the second pillar of their solution directly takes on the second part of their diagnosis. If a core problem is colonialism and stolen land, then the answer has to be land back.
And there it is again, that perfect symmetry. Colonialism is a project of taking land, taking culture, taking sovereignty. Land back is framed as the exact opposite, a project of returning. It's about the physical return of land and, just as importantly, the full restoration of indigenous peoples' authority over their own lives and communities.
And it's so important to get this. Land back is about way more than just signing over a deed. It's a huge, comprehensive vision. We're talking about restoring languages, preserving traditions, and making sure communities have control over their own food, their own housing, their own environment. It's a call to dismantle the whole colonial capitalist system right at its foundation.
And this brings us to the third and final pillar in their framework. If the state uses coercive power, police and prisons, to protect the colonial and capitalist system, then the solution has to be abolition.
The logic here is really direct. They see the prison industrial complex as the modern-day enforcer for the entire system they've just diagnosed. It's what protects the property relations set up through colonialism and capitalism. So for them, abolition is the strategy to directly challenge that power by taking apart its institutions and building new ways to create real safety.
Now, this is absolutely crucial. This framework defines abolition not just as tearing things down, but as building things up. It's a two-part strategy. On one hand, you pull resources and support away from the systems that cause harm, police, prison, surveillance. But at the exact same time, you invest those resources back into the community to create the things that actually keep people safe, like good housing, mental health care, and strong social bonds.
Okay, so we've got the three pillars: mutual aid, land back, and abolition. But here's where this framework gets really sophisticated. The argument is that you can't just pick one. They have to be pursued together as a single, integrated strategy for liberation.
So why is that? Why can't a group just focus on mutual aid or just pour all their energy into land back? Well, the answer goes back to the problem itself. Because the system of violence is all fused together, the solution has to be too.
And this is where it all clicks into place. I mean, think about it. How can you sustain a land back movement without the strong community bonds and real-world support that mutual aid networks create? You probably can't. And okay, let's say you do succeed in getting land back. How do you protect that liberated land from state violence without an abolitionist strategy? And finally, what does it even mean to abolish the police if you don't also dismantle the colonial property relations that the police were literally created to protect? Each pillar needs the other two to have a real shot at success.
This slide just brings it all together so perfectly. On the left, you've got the three-part diagnosis of the problem: capitalist, colonial, and Christian state violence. And on the right, you have the perfectly mirrored three-part solution: mutual aid, land back, and abolition. It's just this incredibly elegant, cohesive framework where each part of the solution is designed to directly undo a part of the problem.
But for this community, this isn't just some intellectual exercise. They're actively trying to turn this whole framework from a cool idea into a real-world practice. So what does that actually look like on the ground?
These are the actual, concrete next steps they've laid out for themselves. It's everything from formally committing to address the problem, to paying indigenous leaders for their work, to totally replacing their old charity models with mutual aid. They're talking about funding real projects, developing community safety resources that exist outside the state, and even changing their own internal rules to match these new values. This is an active, living process of trying to build their vision.
And this final quote from them really just captures the spirit of this entire thing. It echoes that long Quaker tradition that we started with, right? For them, it's not enough to just believe something. The goal is to make your actions match your words, to let your life itself be the proof of the different world you're trying to build.
So, we've just explored one community's incredibly integrated plan for change, one that's grown out of their own unique history. And it really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? In a world of these complex, tangled-up systems, what does it truly mean to conscientiously object? Is it just about saying no? Or is it about the hard, creative, and hopeful work of building something new in its place?